This is Anissa Avon with Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. We are excited to have you guys on the call with us today, spending your lunch hour with us. We really appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about Here Comes Generation Z. And I have to tell you, we have had an amazing amount of interest in this topic. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Annie Kirshenman, our expert, who also presented information on the millennial generation. She has made it part of her training and educational process to learn about the multi-generational workforce, particularly millennials and Generation Z. So before we go there, though, I just want to say that I want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. We want these webinars to be what you guys on the call hope to gain from this. And so what that means is that if there's a particular outcome or a particular question or a particular learning objective that you want to take away, please don't hesitate to submit your question in the question box so that we can make sure that we answer your questions and so that we can make sure that this webinar and all of our webinars are relevant for you. I'll do my best to monitor and ensure we address your questions. And if we are unable to address your question, I am happy to provide one-on-one coaching and consulting free of charge, no obligation. Just give us a call or give me a call, and I'm happy to answer any questions about anything that's in one of our webinars, or if I'm not an expert on the topic, I certainly imagine that someone on our team is. So we're just about ready to go. There's a few more people coming on to the call, so welcome if you're just now joining us. And I want to say thank you to the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. The Whitmarsh Consulting Group is the sponsor of our webinar today. They are a group of distinctly skilled experts who specialize in creating revenue streams through digital marketing. If your organization would benefit from expanding your digital footprint or your digital strategy, check them out online at wcg-bp.com. That's WCG as in Whitmarsh Consulting Group, -BP as in bestpractices.com. Or give David Whitmarsh a call at 647-966-1340. So today, we aim to make this webinar jam-packed full of important and relevant information, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about our objectives, and then I want to introduce you to Annie. So our objectives today, and Annie's going to introduce us a little bit more to what we're going to take away, but who are Gen Z? What do they want, and what are their priorities? What are the organizational challenges and benefits related to your Gen Z workforce? How is Gen Z likely to impact the workplace? And how can companies prepare to work with them? So as I mentioned, Annie is an expert on multi-generational workforce challenges, and she is well known for her leadership of an international company. Annie has been working in the learning and development space for, gosh, Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say at least since 2005, if I remember correctly. Is that right, Annie?
Well, that's when I stepped down from my CEO role. So that would be when I went full-time into that, but I've been doing it for much longer than that.
I thought so. Okay. Well, I knew that you had began your corporate training when your experience in the corporate place when you worked your way through graduate school. Annie went from Wall Street to the Upper West Side of New York. She had the rare opportunity to experience the world of business from the trenches in many companies. For 16 years, Annie worked with an international organic and sustainable certification company and stepped down from her position as president and CEO in 2005. Annie has served on many boards of directors at both the local, the national, and the international level. including corporations, small businesses, NGOs, and other nonprofit associations. She continues to consult with some of those organizations on strategic initiatives, and she has direct experience in the establishment of a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. She has been on the faculty of international development and training companies. All this has given Annie a very broad overview of the challenges that face executives and leaders and human resources professionals who are charged with employee development and culture development in their organization. So a couple more things I want to mention about Annie. One is I've known Annie myself for at least a decade now. And in fact, in addition to having the privilege of having Annie on our executive coach and master trainer team, Annie has delivered a number of team development programs and executive coaching programs for our clients. She and I went to Tepoztlán, Mexico together and climbed the sacred mountain. Now, we might be right together. We did this.
We did, yeah.
We did not climb it in hills the way many of the locals did. But we did climb it together, so that's something we have that I'll always cherish. And Annie may not tell this to you guys about herself, so I want to say it. In 2005, U.S. Senator Kent Conrad named Annie Kirshenman the very first Marketplace Entrepreneur of the Year. When he presented the award, he stated, "Annie is a true entrepreneur in every sense of the word. She is excited, driven, and most importantly has true entrepreneurial spirit that can turn a good idea into reality," which truly that is exactly what I think of Annie when I think of you, Annie. So what have I not shared that would be good for our participants to hear today?
Well, I think maybe you've covered a lot. The only other thing that I'd add is what's on a slide to come, and I wonder if before we get to that, if you wanted to interject a little bit more about turnkey. And
we can do that at the very end. We'll just move on into your slide there and talk about, I want you to share a little bit more about what makes you the expert.
Okay, super. Well, thank you, Anissa. That was just a great introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm Annie, and as you can see from the slide there, in addition to what Anissa has already shared, I'm a board certified coach with the specialty designation executive, corporate business, and leadership. And even though I'm a business person, have been for more than 20 years now, the world of business is not where I started. I actually come from a background in the arts, and creativity as well as innovation are a major part of my work today as a coach and facilitator. And I just love sharing what I've learned, what works, what's interesting for me as well as others. And generations in the workplace is not only really interesting stuff. I believe understanding these dynamics and learning how to work with them is essential to the success of any company or organization. So let's get to it, shall we?
Perfect.
Okay, so we're going to start with an overview of generations in the workplace. And if you attended our webinar on the millennials, this will be a refresh for you. There are essentially 4 generations in the workplace today. While there are still some members of the so-called greatest generation still at work, like my dad, he's in the 80s and still going strong, bless him. This is an exception. Basically, we have active in the workplace the baby boomers, of course, and while some of them are retiring, a lot of them are staying in the workplace, or rather than retiring, are shifting to another career. The encore career, this has been dubbed. Really interesting topic. Gen Z, or as Pew Research has dubbed them, the forgotten middle child. Pew says sandwiched between 2 behemoth generations, the boomers and the millennials. Gen Z is a smaller, quieter, and unfortunately often overlooked generation. the millennials, for which there is a previous webinar, which I believe is recorded. So if you'd like to learn more about the millennials and you didn't join us, just contact Turnkey for the link on that recording. They are, of course, older than Gen Z. The youngest of the millennials are just entering the workplace. So they're the youngest of those are coming into the workplace. And our topic today, the up and coming Gen Z, the oldest of which are around 20 or 21, just entering the workplace. So
Annie, I want to ask you a quick question.
Sure.
I think I heard you say Gen Z was the forgotten generation, but you're actually referring to Gen Y, that's between baby boomers and millennials. Is that right?
It's Gen X. Yep, that is
Okay, Gen X.
between
Okay.
the boomers and the millennials. Sorry if
Now I understand. Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, it's Gen X, the forgotten middle child, and unfortunately often overlooked. They're quiet and they're smaller. Okay, and thank you for that clarification. So before we dig into Gen Z, we have a poll for you. The question here being, what multi-generational, boy, that's a mouthful, workplace challenges is your company experiencing? And we have some choices for you there. Anissa, am I correct that it's select one of the following? So
you got it. So select one of the following. Yep.
Go ahead.
So we have quite a few people that are participating. Thank you, guys. It's looking like at the moment it's almost a neck and neck tie between the first two: negative stereotyping and unconscious bias, and lack of understanding of cross-generational differences. But the one that's actually at this moment getting the most action is what works for one generation may not work with the other. That is probably an understatement.
Yeah, no kidding.
It looks like it's coming to a close, so thank you, guys. I am going to hit close, and then I'm going to share the results with everyone. So we have the first two, literally a tie: negative stereotyping and unconscious bias, and lack of understanding of cross-generational differences. Folks on the call are certainly seeing those two. Number in the final one is the lowest is conflict between the generations, and then the one that you're probably not surprised about is what works for one generation may not work with the other. And it is interesting that some folks on the call are not really seeing any impact with the multi-generational workforce at the moment. Annie, are you seeing that this feedback is about what you would expect?
It's close to what I would expect. Generally speaking, the companies that I work with are experiencing more conflict kinds of situations. So it's interesting that isn't showing up among our audience today. But certainly
assume that lack of understanding and negative stereotyping creates conflict.
Definitely. Yeah, and the idea that what works for one generation may not work for another definitely doesn't. And this also, of course, leads to misunderstanding and genuine challenges for companies that can impact the bottom line. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for that. We're going to, whoops, as soon as I get back into my PowerPoint, we're going to talk about what's happening with Gen Z. When I started to research Gen Z, I made the assumption that I wouldn't find much on them. Not true. There is actually a surprising amount of literature and research out there on this generation. And in terms of their size, at the moment, they are roughly 23 million or so in the United States, about 2 billion worldwide. And it is expected that this generation will surpass all previous generations in terms of its size. In the United States right now, it's roughly 1/4 of the US population. And it's also known, you may have heard these terms, it's also known as iGen, the Centennials, and the sharing generation, to name but a few tags that are being thrown around out there about Gen Z. While the dates for this generation vary, the literature generally agrees that they were born between the mid-1990s to the present, with an end date not yet determined. Although I did run across one study from the University of Cincinnati, which puts Gen Z's end date at 2004, which would be a pretty short period of time when compared to other generations. So I'd take that with a grain of salt. At the same time, this study mentions the next generation that they're starting to track as educators, which they have dubbed Gen Alpha. So I guess that's a future research project. But back to Generation Z, again, born between the mid-1990s up to the present. As I mentioned earlier, the oldest are in their late teens and early 20s. And with everything that we're looking at today, we need to bear in mind that researchers typically like to vet adult characteristics when they're identifying generational trends and identities or hallmarks. And since Gen Z is still youngsters and older adolescents, these characteristics have yet to be vetted. So please bear that in mind. And be that as it may, there are hallmarks of this generation already emerging. The Center for Generational Kinetics and Bean College have lots of information, including white papers and recent, just last year, 2017 research results. They're saying that Gen Z is showing up as self-aware, self-reliant, innovative, and goal-oriented. Gen Z wants to make a difference in the world, much like the millennials. A large portion of this generation would prefer to have a job that makes a positive impact in some way. An overwhelming majority of them are eco-conscious and concerned about humanity's impact on the environment. They're eager problem solvers, and the research says that if what they want does not exist, they will create it themselves. Gen Z, even more diverse than the millennials. And as we go through our presentation today, you will see this over and over again. It's a big hallmark of this generation. Brands and employers are going to have to learn how to see the world through the diverse eyes of Gen Z if they want to win their loyalty. Ultimately, Gen Z sees a world where race, religion, and gender do not matter. This is a highly educated generation. It's likely that a larger percentage of Gen Z will attend and graduate from college than any previous generation, including the millennials. Interestingly enough, it's also a self-educated generation. They can learn complex things like how to upgrade your computer's operating system the same way they learn how to bake a vegan apple pie, one video at a time. They still possess general knowledge, but they've come of age, and I think this is a really important hallmark of this group. They've come of age placing a priority on how fast you can find the right information rather than on whether or not you know the right information. So they may not know the answer, but gosh, they will know how to find it.
Exactly. One thing I thought that was interesting when I was doing my own homework was that the Census Bureau is actually forecasting that over half of the kids in America will belong to a minority race or ethnic group by 2020. So diversity is not seen as what we've previously seen it. It's actually, this is the norm, which is why this group has an intolerance for a lack of tolerance for diversity, because that's the life that they lead.
Interesting. Yeah, it's clearly going to be a different world. that's for sure. So just to summarize here, some of the hallmarks of this generation, as we've been discussing: the diversity, highly educated, self-aware, self-reliant, innovative, goal-oriented, and that all-important want to make a difference. Okay, we're going to pop in another poll for you here. What can you imagine Gen Z might do to improve your workplace, or how can they improve your workplace? And again, we're asking you to select one of those.
You know, as we're doing that, I read an article that was talking about the style choices, and they were calling the style choices of Gen Z as norm core, as the prominent style trend. And basically that's meaning bland, boring, basic, or in most cases absent of brand logos. And that's part of their identity, is not relying on a designer brand or someone else's idea of fashion to establish their identity. And I think that that kind of data is what the scientists are using to formulate this prediction of how will they show up, how will that independence show up in the workplace. So here we go. So the poll results are in. So how might they improve your workplace? The majority of people say more shared teamwork, fewer silos, or this piece I think is very interesting, self-learning staff. Wow, wouldn't that be a great idea?
Indeed, yeah.
They need to learn. And then these other pieces that many are seeing as an improvement, tech geniuses and ethnic diversity.
Excellent. Really great stuff. Okay. And do we have any other ideas in the chat box on that 5% that said other, or?
Look like we have any other ideas, but folks, if you do have some other ideas about how Gen Z is improving the workplace or how they might, we'd love to hear it.
Very good. Okay, let's carry on. Get back into my PowerPoint here. There we go. Okay, so a very strong hallmark of this generation is they were born digital. Their motto might be all technology all the time. The research says that Gen Z is the curation generation, collecting and sharing amongst their sphere of influence while also developing a neuroplasticity, in this case, the ability to filter and process enormous amounts of information efficiently and with purpose. Not only are they more connected and diverse than previous generations, their immediate and unfiltered access to information from around the world allows for varied perspectives within a single global community. And here's some interesting statistics regarding technology, again, from that University of Cincinnati study. They say 70% of Gen Z watch more than 2 hours of YouTube content each day. Most average 5 devices or screens per day. That's an average. And yet, and this is really interesting, 85% still prefer to interact with friends in person versus on social media.
That's astonishing. And have you in your research and your observation found that is different than the millennial generation?
Well, it's very interesting because it's kind of like technology on steroids from the millennials, I think, because they're a very tech-savvy generation as well. I think what the research is pointing to here is that Gen Z was basically born with a cell phone in their hands. I mean, they are the first generation that was literally indoctrinated by technology. Pretty much from the womb. So, we'll be seeing a little bit more information about that later in the program here, how that's impacted Gen Z.
Right.
Okay, we are going to watch a short video now. This is Gen Z in their own words from a fabulous resource called C-Space. I encourage you to visit their website at cspace.com for more information on Gen Z, and they also have some information on other generations in the workplace. It's good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug my headset now so that you can hear the presentation as well as see it.
What does it mean to be a part of Gen Z? How would you define your generation? I would define my generation as everything's constantly changing. Like, we're surrounded by new things, new technology, new ideas. We're the first generation that's grown up with social media as a real big part of our lives. We're a lot more social as a generation. Growing up with companies like Google and Facebook really shaped how we think about the world. We saw the financial crisis right when we were becoming old enough to understand what that meant.
Being a part of Gen Z for me is asking why all the time.
To not be happy or content with what has been going on in the past.
Finding new ways to do old things. We're a generation of problem solvers who are learning to take what we have and go beyond what we already know.
Gen Z is really just a word. It's not really a thing you can describe people by.
I really don't think of it as a community at all. I don't think of it as a unit, except when told to.
The more the world changes, the less thoughtful people are.
People have no excuse with the mass information out there to not feel a certain sense of responsibility.
I don't think technology accurately substitutes human contact, and I think we're lacking a lot of that.
If you were in charge, how would you change the way business is done?
Truthfully, I really don't think about companies that much.
I would definitely place more of an emphasis on good citizenship.
There are a lot of stores where you can get the exact same thing for either $100 or $10, and the $100 one is somehow better because it costs more. I think that sucks.
I think our generation is kind of on the brink of maybe a cultural revolution.
I think they need to be more malleable. They need to be more like able to constantly change, because I feel like the world around us, we're constantly changing it. What I like now, I probably won't even like tomorrow. Who knows?
Okay, Anissa, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
So
super.
much for sharing that. You know, as I'm watching it, my two children are Gen Zers. My son Parker is a junior at Texas A&M at this time, and my daughter Ashlyn is a junior in high school. And those words coming from that group of kids are exactly like my children.
Are they? Wow. Interesting. Well, and I think you know, probably a lot of people on the webinar today can relate to that, perhaps from what their own children are saying, and also what we're witnessing as Gen Z takes focus in the media. Okay, so let's carry on here with some more information. This is a report from an organization called Vision Critical out of Vancouver, BC, and this is a report that is available. We'll send a link for you to get your hands on this resource if you wish, post-webinar. It's fairly comprehensive and very interesting report. So we are just going to hit some of the highlights here today. That's all we have time for, unfortunately. Generation Z is the future of the global economy, and that future already at your doorstep. This year, 2018, they'll control $200 billion in direct spending, and they will also continue to influence more than $600 billion in spending by their parents. Gen Z is a sober generation. While they're optimistic and driven about their personal ambitions, they're also pragmatic and very aware of forces beyond their control. Here it is again, that ethnic diversity, likely to be the last generation in America with a Caucasian majority, as I think you mentioned earlier, Anissa. They're savers, not spenders. Most of them were investing heavily into savings accounts before the tender age of 10. They're an on-demand generation. They've abandoned television and the desktop PC for laptops and mobile devices. Not surprisingly, they're expert online researchers and shoppers, and according to this study, they tend to visit stores only as a last resort. Here's one of my favorite points from this research, and certainly interesting for businesses and the workplace. They have about an 8-second attention span, and this has sparked the increasing popularity of 10 seconds or less video advertising and apps like Snapchat. They prefer fresh ingredients over processed foods, and the words natural, sustainable, and organic resonate strongly on product packaging and restaurant menus. As we saw in the video, they are not seduced by high-end luxury brands. They prize and value personal style more than designer labels. They're far ahead of all generations when it comes to mobile payments and bank transactions. Again, not surprisingly, they carry their bank branches in their pockets. They are career focused, ready to work hard, think for themselves, and pursue new opportunities. And again, the diversity point, they believe in diversity, equality, non-discrimination, and the alleviation of poverty. Okay,
Well,
a couple, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You know, in thinking in terms of organizations that are preparing for this workforce and how that multi-generational organization will work together, one of the things that I know that you had mentioned, and you'll have to correct me if my data is wrong, but with the millennial generation, many of them are finding that they can stay at one position for about 2 years. Is that accurate? That most of them, if they're not satisfied, they'll turn over pretty quick, about 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that could be a ballpark. Yeah, I think we've got individual differences there, but it is an issue with the millennials for sure.
And one of the things that I think that we're in conversation now about this Gen Z is the very same drivers of making sure that, as that one millennial said on the C-Space video, was good citizenship and making sure that an organization's values are aligned with Gen Z, which means meaning, purpose, making a difference, making the world a better place. But we also have to pay attention to that 8-second attention span, because
indeed.
Second attention span, the desire for meaning and purpose, and coupled with this, they're not afraid to problem solve. In fact, it was a Harvard Business Review article that said that their research did, I think it said, no, I know it did. It said 70% of Gen Z teens were self-employed, meaning they're teaching piano lessons, they're selling goods on eBay. Both of my children have bought and sold things in order to get money for stuff that they wanted, versus 12% of previous generations holding traditional, versus previous generations, but only 12% of Gen Z are holding traditional jobs, babysitting, waiting tables, yard work. So when we look at those numbers, 70% are self-employed, they are not afraid to tell an organization, either you align with my values and you recognize who I am and what I have to contribute, or that's okay, I'll go sell stuff out of my garage, etc.
Very true. It is very true. To the point on a previous slide, that if what they want doesn't exist, they'll create it themselves. And so we're already seeing that, even though they're so young to the workforce. It's interesting. Okay, so this is just a quick couple more resources for you from the popular press. Again, we'll be sending you links for those resources after the webinar. It's more about Gen Z in their own words, in case you're interested in hearing more from the Gen Zers themselves. Okay, so what do they want in the workplace? And again, as we've been saying, they're very new to the workplace, so we need to stay tuned on this. And very recent research publication, this one from March of 2017, so it's roughly a year old. It gives us some clues as to Gen Z's professional priorities. And on your slide here, these are in the order of importance from this report. This resource provides research-based information about how Gen Z workers can get the most out of their careers, and also offers suggestions for employers on how to help Gen Z develop their careers and their potential. So this may be a resource that you want to have on your HR bookshelf. So what do they want? Well, they want to do well in the current role that they hold. They want to make money, and they want to make more money. They treasure a work-life balance. There you see the diversity priority again. They are interested in promotion. They're also interested in changing careers, so maybe not the best news for employers. And again, interestingly enough, at this early age, they are already planning for the ability to retire. Some additional comments I'll just throw in from that University of Cincinnati study. Again, they're looking at Gen Z through the lens of their student populations. As Gen Z moves closer to graduation, they say all indications are that they will seek their own unique success criteria when it comes to their careers. And this is to your point as well, Anissa. This group will be part of the most diverse workforce in history. Forecasters expect that they'll prioritize workplace culture and engagement over salary. So this is an indication that even though they want to make money, there are other things that are also extremely important to them. And they will emphasize the importance of making a difference in the world. The reporting structure that they crave looks more like mentorship than management. So again, maybe a clue for employers and supervisors. A few other statistics for you here. 76% want to convert their hobbies into full-time jobs. Again, perhaps Anissa, to your point. 60% want their jobs to impact the world, and a whopping 72% say money would not motivate them to work harder or stay with their employer. So again, some early information about what's important to them. Another relatively recent research report, it's about a year old, introduces what they identify as 7 distinguishing traits of Gen Z. They've dubbed them phygital. And the definition of this is that the line between the physical and digital worlds for Gen Z hasn't just been blurred, it's been completely eliminated. 91% of Gen Zers say that a company's technological sophistication would influence their decision to accept a position. Hyper-custom. So from job titles to career paths, the pressure to customize has been turned up by this generation. 56% of Gen Zers, according to this report, want to write their own job descriptions. Interesting. They're very realistic. They grew up with skeptical Gen X parents in the aftermath of 9/11 and the Great Recession, and that has created in Gen Z a very pragmatic mindset when it comes to preparing for the future. Interesting. They are determined not to make the same mistakes as the millennials. FOMO, you may have run across this acronym. It's the fear of missing out. And apparently Gen Z suffers from an intense fear of missing out on anything. The good news is that they're going to stay on top of all of the trends. The bad news is that they worry they're not moving ahead fast enough. They are we-economists. From Uber to Airbnb, Gen Zers have only known a world with a shared economy. And the predictions are that they will push to break down internal and external silos like never before. Gen Z is also the do-it-yourself generation, and the authors project that this fierce independent nature will collide, perhaps, head-on with many of the collaborative cultures that the millennials have fought for. So again, we need to stay tuned on this to see how this plays out, again, with that we-economists trait, which is perhaps a complement to the do-it-yourself trait. And finally, driven, with those Gen X parents who drilled into them that there are winners and there are losers. This demographic is one motivated group. 72% of Gen Zers say they are competitive with people doing the same job. Okay, so we're going to touch on now what employers want, and again, it's early, and we just don't have a lot of experiential data from employers, so we're not 100% sure yet exactly what employers want. And early concerns tend to circulate around these two issues, that Gen Z will not stay in one place for very long. Think about that desire for changing careers and the 8-second attention span, excuse me, and that they cannot fully invest in the job. And these concerns may be amplified by the fact that older and more traditionally dedicated workers are retiring, your baby boomers. So heads up to employers to pay attention to how Gen Z starts to show up in your workplace and what it is that you want from them. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the impact in a moment. And we got another poll for you here first. What might employers do to prepare for Generation Z?
I think this is a really good question because, as you said, there are certain predictors of what we can expect, and yet at what point does an organization prepare for those? And in my experience with working with clients, the piece about fostering cross-generational team interactions is what I'm seeing most of our clients attending to now. It's relevant, it's timely, it addresses that multi-generational workforce, and it will produce real results, whereas a lot of the other things that we've talked about, we believe the predictions will come to fruition, but like you said, there's not a lot of experiential data to really draw from.
Exactly, yeah, but plenty of indicators, so it's probably not too early to start thinking about it and planning for it.
Exactly. So let's see, we have wait and see, 2%, increase agility and flexibility, very good, 30%. I think that goes without even saying, what do we do to prepare? I think all work.
They're very agile and flexible, so I think we need to get on the bandwagon there.
I like this. Brainstorm on how to work with that short attention span ahead of time. The majority here being foster cross-generational team interactions right now.
Exactly. It's maybe not too early to start preparing your current workforce for Gen Z entering as well. All right. Excellent. Great. Thank you for that, everybody. Wonderful. My PowerPoint again. There we go. Come back. There we are. Okay. So go ahead, Anissa.
Jeff, thank you for your question. He writes, would flexibility be in job description or in daily tasks? What if there's not much room for flexibility, how might an employer come up with a flexibility that will work within job roles that simply require rigidness, for example?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm not 100% sure I know the answer to it. It's going to be, I think, a point of strategic discussion. Everything about that question and everything about Gen Z in your workplace, because you guys know more about your individual workplaces than anybody. And this idea of flexibility, I think the answer to it is going to be, it depends on what the job requires, what you can be flexible about and what you can't be flexible about, and then being upfront about that in the hiring process. And that's just off the top of my head, but it's an excellent question. And
that you're right about that. I think that knowing that the Gen Z expects and values flexibility, in some organizations they're going to be able to say, you can work 7 to 3 or 8 to 4, and that's enough flexibility. In other organizations, there's going to be a safety checklist that cannot ever be revised, that must be adhered to. And for those individuals, they will have to find different types of flexibility to work into the role. I've seen some organizations talk about job sharing as a means of building in flexibility, as well as some of the goals of some of the matrix organizations that we're seeing are allowing greater flexibility in how the job is done. So I think that that's something that's going to have to shake out for different organizations, particularly those adhere to certain classical styles of command and control leadership. This generation, my suspicion, is going to rebel against that and be completely okay finding a different opportunity.
I would say so. I mean, it's obviously a very participatory generation. They want to be included. And I think part of perhaps the answer to the question that our attendee is posing is we need to learn more about exactly what they mean when they say they want flexibility. So that's a conversation. So excellent question. Thank you for that. So what can you imagine about the impact? I mean, of course, based on the projected size alone of this generation, it's potentially huge. And we are basically speculating here because of the youth of this generation and again, our lack of experience with them. I would say that businesses need to begin including this demographic in 5 to 10 year strategic plans, and that's both from a customer perspective as well as a recruitment perspective. Remembering, and this is the challenge, I think, remembering that Gen Z is fast moving and ever changing, and they may be challenging to pin down. So that's where our agility and flexibility as employers and marketers comes in. Speaking of marketing, from both a marketing as well as a recruitment perspective, we're looking at a very different approach. In a nutshell, we can say keep it digital and keep it short, remembering that 8-second attention span. And what's not on your slide, I'm just going to throw out a few more thoughts from MSNBC Business, which suggests these marketing tips, which might also suggest recruiting tips. They say, go big online and social, but probably not Facebook. They point to platforms like Snapchat and Whisper, the so-called disappearing content platforms. And as a sidebar, I was not familiar with Snapchat at all. I'm a boomer, so it's like brand new to me. So I visited the website and watched some videos that explain how and why it's different, and I would recommend that people check it out because it's definitely appealing to the younger generations and that short attention span.
Oh yeah, both of my kids say, "Mother, we don't use Facebook." And like that was some ridiculous question, of course. Why would I connect with my mother on Facebook? But do use Snapchat and Whisper, and there's another one that they and they also use Twitter, amazingly enough.
Mm-hmm. They do like Twitter, yes. Yeah, it's fast and short, so I can see why that would appeal. Interesting. Another suggestion, keep their personal information secure. Not surprisingly, cybersecurity ranks high with them. Again, share that diversity. They're looking for it in order to determine their loyalty. Add music. I don't really need to say anything more about that. They like it. Use it. And design with them in mind. That may go without saying, but again, they're not into those high-end luxury brands, and they're more focused on quality than on verbiage. Okay, so we'd just love to hear your thoughts about this. What do you think the impact could be of Gen Z in your business or in your area? And if you have a thought about that, please go ahead and type it into the chat box or the questions box, I guess. Either one would work.
You know, one of the things that we're really seeing is how Gen Z is responding to the political topics of the day regarding gun control, et cetera, and what is the tragedy in Florida. I am inspired, honestly, by my kids' response to this, as well as their friends. They are definitely looking to participate in an upcoming protest where around the country will be walking out of school. And but my point around that is they are truly an activist community, and they are rising up together to make their voices known, even though you know, in past generations the kids might say, well, I can't make a difference, so why bother? So I find it very inspiring to see these kids rising up in that way.
It's very interesting to watch. I mean, you think back to the video and that we just watched, and that was made at least a year ago or more. And you know, the emphasis on good citizenship and making a change, and we're certainly seeing that. We're seeing them participate. We're seeing them speak out. We're seeing them drive. I mean, all of those qualities that we've been talking about during this webinar. Current events are certainly giving us an opportunity to see that in real time.
And that is for sure. We're getting quite a few responses, and so I want to read them off. And then there's a question here that I want you to think about. I'm going to give you the question first, Annie, and then I'm going to read off some of the other impact statements. So the question is, please share 5 distinct differences between millennials. Thank you, John, for saying that. He says it seems blurry. So while you're thinking about that, Annie, I'm going to share. Christopher says much shorter training sessions focused on just one concept at a time. We're actually already seeing that in some of our requests for training. Jeff writes, concerns about time and performance needed to receive growth and compensation. Beverly has written, they will want more transparency on how decisions were made, especially if they are not part of a decision. So true. Thank you. Delayed earned gratification, if you will. Jeff Swanson has made that statement. I think that's certainly true. Delayed or earned gratification. As a marketer in finance, how would you suggest I market to this group? Not for hiring purpose, but getting in front of this generation. So thank you, Linda, for that. Alyssa has written, in terms of corporate social responsibility, what are the expectations of Gen Z and what ways should companies focus? So actually now I've got quite a few questions. So I'm going to pause and let you answer that first one, and then we'll see what we have to answer the
Okay, well, let me just, should I go ahead and skip that poll?
Yeah, let's just skip that.
All right. So we'll just put up the questions and answers slide then, since that's where we are. And that was a great question, and I heard that you wanted 5, but I'm also noticing the time and that we have some other questions before we go to wrap up. So I'm going to just, again, off the top of my head, hand you a couple of ideas about the differences between millennials and Gen Z. And in saying about the differences, I also want to say there are a lot of similarities. So if you're experiencing it as a little bit fuzzy, I'm not surprised. I think one of the big differences that I'm seeing in terms of the research anyway between millennials and Gen Z is that the Gen Z is driven, they're competitive, they're ready to work hard, as opposed to the millennials who tend to, this is not every millennial, but they tend to feel like things should be handed to them on a platter. We've also got, you know, the technology commonality, and it seems like Gen Z has kicked that into hyperdrive. And I think one of the other pieces that we're going to have to pay attention to here, as the literature is pointing to, is potential conflict between the millennials and Gen Z in terms of that, you know, whether or not everybody's going to come down around that sharing and shared economy, or if there's going to be conflict between the priorities of the millennials and Gen Z's fierce independent nature. So great question, and I'd be happy to discuss that more offline.
That's very helpful. Linda's question might be something. So as a marketer in finance, how would you suggest I market to this group, not for hiring, but getting in front of this generation?
Yeah, well, as we saw in a very recent slide there, tips on marketing, you're going to want to keep it digital. You're going to want to keep it short. You are going to want to go to the platform. They're big into social media and technology. That's going to be the best place to reach them. And you'll want to be on the platforms that they frequent. So that, again, would be platforms like Snapchat and Whisper and Twitter. That's where they're hanging. So, you know, like any marketing, you go where your audience is and you give them what they're looking for. And remember, you know, they're not into brands. They're looking for value, diversity, you know, those priorities that are important to them.
Very helpful. Angela asks, how does Gen Z view the importance of a drug-free, safe workplace? Do they value investment in their health and well-being in the workplace?
Oh, that's a great question, and I do not know the answer to it, but I'd be happy to do some research on it if we can get back to Angela, is it?
Absolutely. And, you know, you're right. I don't think we have the research. I do think we can point to a few key statistics and discern what is maybe showing up. One of the things that we saw in the research was that this generation was much less likely to drink and smoke than past generations as teenagers. I find really interesting. I find that to be an interesting statistic, but I also see what's happening with the activism. Generation tends to be much more in alignment with seeking a health, being active in regards to creating a safe environment for them and their friends, as well as that piece around they're less likely to drink and smoke. So the answer may not be clear, but some of the statistics are pointing in the direction of they will value and be more likely to align with it. However, I guess if we look at the other things about the generation regarding independence, and if they don't like something, they're going to bail. It'll be interesting to see.
Very, very much so. And yes, I think you're pointing to current events again, and the fact that their safety is a priority for them. So surely they're going to carry that into the workplace.
Well, and Dawn, thank you for this question. She has written, as a talent acquisition leader, it's important to modify processes to attract and engage Gen Zers. She says she's also taking away the digitalness of Gen Z, and wondering, do you see similarities with Gen X? Meaning, Dawn says she sees some trends with drive and independence.
Well, Gen X are their parents. So, you know, when you look at generations from that broad perspective, so boomers, parents to the millennials, Gen X, parents to Gen Z, you get some similarities because of the priorities of the parenting generation, if you will. So it would not surprising that you're already seeing some parallels between Gen X and Gen Z, and it'll be interesting as Gen Z becomes adult, how those gel.
So I know that we are at the top of the hour, and I want to honor everyone's time and say thank you so much for being here. You know, one of the things that we do at Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions is we want your feedback. So if you have a topic that you'd like to see us cover in a webinar, or you have feedback about today's webinar, if there's something we can do to improve, I really want to hear it. So thank you for that. The other thing I want to offer folks on the call is we provide something that I find to be pretty unique. We do organizational consulting on every engagement, even prior to ever knowing whether or not we're going to work with you in your organization. Just yesterday, I had a long brainstorming session with I'll call her a friend now. We've been in conversations and not done business together yet, but we are helping her make the case for some of the programs and initiatives she wants to bring into the organization. And whether we ever do business or not, I enjoy that work. And Annie and I are open to having a conversation around your multi-generational workforce, how to prepare for Gen Z, how to support that cross-generation conflict management or teamwork. And so we would be very pleased to offer and to have you take us up on a complimentary consultation, with the goal being at the end of that conversation, we want to support you in having some type of an actionable strategy. That's the goal. Whether we spend 30 minutes or an hour together, we will support you in determining, typically it's approximately 3 steps to whatever the solution is that you're looking for. Whatever you bring to the table will help you in creating an actionable strategy inside that session. So I want to say thank you. If there's something that Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions can do to support your goals, give us a call at 281-469-4244 or shoot us an email at leader@turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. If Annie, by the way, does quite a bit of the Gen Z and millennial and multi-generational workforce. So if you have a need for a keynote speaker or a master trainer for team development, I'd love for you to be in touch, and we can put you in touch with Annie to do some work. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Annie, fantastic, really jam-packed with information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Anissa, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, guys. Have a great afternoon.